Hello everyone. Today I will tell you 6 horror stories in different scenarios. If you like them, please subscribe to us to bring you more exciting stories. This happened back when I was living alone for the first time. I had just moved into a small apartment, and I was excited about the freedom that came with it. A few days had passed since I had settled in, and everything seemed normal, quiet. Even I was getting used to the new place, unpacking little by little. But then, one night, something happened that I'll never forget. It was late, I don't know how late, but I know it was after midnight. I was getting ready for bed, already half asleep, and everything was quiet. Out of nowhere, the doorbell rang. It was so unexpected that it made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at that hour. I remember freezing for a second, thinking that it must be a mistake. Who rings someone's doorbell in the middle of the night? Right. Curious but cautious, I walked over to the door and peeked through the peephole. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a woman standing there, someone I had never seen before in my life. She looked like she was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, and she just stood there, staring at the door. My first thought was that she had the wrong apartment. Maybe she was looking for someone else. So I half expected her to note my apartment number and realize her mistake and then move on. But something about the way she was just standing there, not moving, felt off. I didn't know what to do. I was asking myself questions like, should I open the door and ask her what she wanted? But then again, it was past midnight, and she was a total stranger. I decided that the safest thing I could do at the time was ignore it. So I quietly stepped away from the door and went back to my room, trying to convince myself that it was nothing to worry about. But before I could even sit down, I heard it loud banging on the door. I froze, my heart started racing. I didn't know what to do. She started shouting, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. It was just frantic, angry yelling. The noise seemed to echo through the apartment, and then panic set in. I found myself backing away from the door, my mind racing with all kinds of worst-case scenarios. Was she crazy? Dangerous? What did she want? At that moment, I was so scared, I didn't even think about calling the police. Instead, I did what any scared person would do. I bolted to my bed, jumped under the covers, and curled up into a ball. I know it sounds childish, but I just wanted to hide, to disappear. I hate confrontation. The banging continued for what felt like forever, but it was only a few minutes. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. No more shouting, no more pounding on the door, just silence. I stayed under my covers, trying to calm my racing heart, thinking maybe she had finally given up and left. After a while, when I finally convinced myself that she was gone, I slowly pulled the covers down and sat up. The apartment was dead silent, and for a moment, I felt relieved. But then, as I was about to get up and check the door, something made me glance towards the window, and that's when I saw her. She was standing outside, staring right at me through the gap in the curtains. I can't even describe the sheer terror I felt at that moment. My apartment was on the ground floor, so she must have walked around the building to get to my window. There was no terrace or anything, just a small patch of grass between the window and the pavement. But there she was, peering through the window, her face almost pressed against the glass. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming at me to run, but where could I go? I was trapped in my own apartment, a place that I had barely gotten used to, and this crazy woman was staring at me. The only thing I could think of was to hide. So I scrambled out of bed and ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat there on the cold floor, my back against the door, listening out for any sounds. I must have stayed in there for hours. I didn't sleep all that night. I just sat there, waiting for the sun to come up, hoping and praying that she would be gone. When morning came, finally, the first light of dawn crept through the bathroom window, and I gathered the courage to leave the bathroom. My legs were stiff, and my body ached from sitting on the hard floor all night. I slowly made my way to the front door, listening carefully for any sounds outside. Everything was quiet, so I took a deep breath and unlocked the door, opening it just a crack to peek outside. No one was there. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe she had finally left for good. Just after I closed the doorbell rang, and I almost jumped out of my skin. But this time, when I looked through the peephole, I saw that it was just my neighbor, a middle-aged guy who lived in the apartment next door actually, the first person to welcome me to the building. I opened the door, and he immediately started complaining about the noise from last night. I tried to apologize and explain what had happened, though I'm sure I looked a mess disheveled, with bags under my eyes from my sleepless night. I told him about the woman who had shown up, and as I described her, his expression changed. "That must be the ex-girlfriend of the guy who lived here before you," he said, his voice a mixture of annoyance and sympathy. Apparently, she had some issues over how they parted ways and had been showing up at the apartments even after the guy moved out. "Hell hath no fury," the neighbor told me. Right. The neighbor explained that she had caused disturbances before banging on the door, shouting, refusing to leave. He guessed it deep down. She didn't fully believe that her ex had moved and she thought he was still living here. Hearing that explanation didn't exactly make me feel better. Sure, it made sense. But it was still terrifying to think that she was so fixated on getting in, so determined that she even tried to find another way in through the window. After that night, I was always on edge, especially around midnight. I kept the curtains tightly shut and double-checked doors were locked before going to bed. I even considered moving out, but in the end, I decided to stay. Though I never really felt comfortably safe in that apartment again. It's one of those experiences that stick with you, even long after it's over. You hear stories about crazy exes and think they're just exaggerated tales. But when something like this happens to you, it's a whole different story. It's left its mark on me. It's made me very uneasy when I hear an unexpected knock at the door. This happened quite recently, so I'm keeping names anonymous for privacy reasons. To give you some context, at the time this incident occurred, I was a 20-year-old female living in Nagano, Japan. I had a passion for live streaming on the internet. I would sing and play the guitar, enjoying it so much that I streamed daily. The effort that I put into my daily streams started to pay off, and I gradually gathered a small but dedicated fan base. Regular viewers started to join, and I recognized their usernames. We would chat between songs, getting to know each other a little better, and it was great to meet people who shared my taste in music. One of these regulars was a man who I'll call Mr. Immerse. I always joined the stream and was one of the people that I spoke with a lot. We shared music recommendations quite regularly, and it felt like we had a real connection, even though we had never met in person. One day, when he joined my stream, I thanked him, saying something like, "That band you recommended the other day was great. Thank you." He then wrote in the chat that he had been to see the band that he recommended and got a limited edition signed CD. And he casually responded with something along the lines of, "Oh, that's great." And this is where the horror began for me. In addition to live streaming, I also had a few social media accounts across different platforms. One afternoon, I was scrolling through my feed, and a private message from Mr. A popped up. I went to read it, and it read as the following: "I sent you that limited edition CD that I mentioned on your stream." I immediately thought, "Sent where? I didn't give you my address." I had never shared my address during my streams or on social media, so I was completely baffled by Mr. His message. When I asked him what he meant, his explanation was not just surprising but downright creepy. Mr. I had tracked down my personal social media account using my public account, and from there, he found my sister's account. My sister had a lax attitude toward online privacy and had publicly shared our city and town. From her account, Mr. had discovered my full name, our city, my boyfriend's name at the time, and even my parents' social media accounts. I was so freaked out by this because I had made a very conscious effort to not put anything personal on the internet, despite my efforts to stay hidden. Mr. managed to piece together enough details to send the CD to me via postal service hold. I was so creeped out that I picked up the CD from the post office but immediately returned it, telling Mr. a little white lie, sorry, but it seems like the information you looked up about me was wrong, so I didn't get that CD. It should make its way back to you. Though I imagine, at this point, I was trying not to upset him. I mean, I did like chatting with him when he joined my live streams, and he had just kind of ruined that relationship. Though since I returned that CD, I felt as if Mr. A's kindness turned to malice. Mr. A's friendly demeanor seemed to turn into something more sinister. His next message, seemingly advice but potentially a subtle warning or threat, read, "Be careful leaving your personal information online. There are people out there who might misuse it." And then the harassment began. He created numerous accounts with variations of my name and birth dates, followed my accounts with all these weird new user profiles. But let me explain, if my birthday was January 1st, the accounts would be named things like my name 101. It is unnerving to see accounts with private information and their names start to follow me. And he also tweeted about places in my town, making me feel like I was being watched. There were no direct threats, but the fear of being constantly monitored became overwhelming. I think he was being very careful. He knew if he said anything, he could just claim that tweeting about a shop in my town wasn't a crime. And I bet that he thought that he was being really smart. And then the situation escalated. Mr. A tweeted from his account, got the ZenRIN maps and phone directories. Just a little more to go. ZenRIN is Japan's database of residential maps and is used for route planning. It's very accurate. And when he mentioned that he was looking into that database and said he only needed a little bit more to go, he downright terrified me. That short tweet sent shivers down my spine. It was clear Mr. I was trying to pinpoint my exact address, and up to that point, he only knew my city and town, which gave me some comfort. But the thought of him finding my house horrified me, not just for my safety but also my family's. We couldn't just pack up and move. My parents weren't renting and they were paying their mortgage, and I felt so scared because if he knew all of our names in our city, finding our exact address seemed pretty inevitable. I started obsessively checking Mr. his account every day, praying that he wouldn't figure our address, but my hopes were dashed when Mr. I got dangerously close. I identified my grandparents' house from a photo of a nearby rice field that I had posted on my private account. The photo barely showed anything but fields, yet he managed to use Google Maps and the ZenRIN directories to narrow down the area, looking for homes with our surname. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to contact the police, hoping they could intervene without escalating the situation. Their suggestion to directly confront Mr. A with a warning made me reluctant. However, I followed their advice and sent a cautious message to Mr. A, hoping it would put him off doing whatever he was plotting. I remember shaking as I was typing, not sure if it was fear or adrenaline, and I wrote out, "I've got in touch with the police. You need to stop." He came back almost instantly with a chilling yet cowardly response, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And after that, his numerous fake accounts began gradually disappearing, one by one. The tweets about finding my address also stopped. His dismissive response and the subsequent disappearance of his fake accounts brought temporary relief, but the damage was done. Since then, I haven't faced any direct harm from Mr. A, but the memories of that time linger. I still catch myself checking Mr. His account, a habit born from those anxious days and long nights. I'm not scared anymore, but I'm very aware. if that makes any sense at all. The internet still is a source of joy. But social media is mainly a reminder of the darker side of human nature for me. I stopped live streaming and deleted all my social media accounts. Erasing my accounts did come with some tears, but it was for the best. I had to do what I could to protect myself and my family. I learned a harsh lesson about privacy. It's a lesson I carry with me, always cautious about what I share and who I trust. The scariest thing about my experience was not just the invasion of privacy, but the realization that behind the screens, humans can be the real monsters. I just hope that he wasn't doing this to others. What he did to me, especially to those who weren't so careful with the information they share. Reflecting on the whole experience, it's alarming now how someone can piece together your life from bits of information shared online. The fact that they could track down my family members, use public records, and even analyze photos to find my location was beyond my wildest nightmares. In the aftermath, I became almost paranoid about my online presence. I would spend hours going through old posts, deleting anything that could be even remotely revealing. I changed my passwords frequently, set all my profiles to private, and stopped engaging with anyone I didn't know personally. The internet felt less like a community and more like a potential threat. The support from my family and friends was crucial during this time. My sister felt particularly guilty. We forgave her, of course, but it was a wake-up call for sure. Despite the fear and anxiety, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. I focused on my studies, spent more time with loved ones, and found other hobbies to fill the void left by my streaming. Every now and then, I would consider returning to live streaming, but the thought of another misstep, lurking in the shadows, always held me back. I continue to hope that Mr. A has moved on and that no one else falls victim to him. Hey everyone. I'm new to this site, and I was planning to post a fictional ghost story. I'll be honest, I couldn't come up with anything that felt right. Instead, I stumbled across the real story section, and I thought, why not share something that actually happened to me? It's not as terrifying as some of the stories I've seen here, but it's something that stuck with me over the years. When I was a kid, I lived near Kyushu University's engineering campus in Fukuoka. The area was pretty quiet and peaceful, the kind of place where you could play outside all day without worrying about anything. But despite the calm atmosphere, there were a few spots around town that everyone said were haunted. There was the Kimeayu Shrine, where people claimed to hear strange noises at night, the uncrossed Able Railroad crossing, and a place called Gior's Forest, where some said that they saw ghostly figures in the trees. Nowadays, the area has become part of Kyushu University's agricultural research farm, so civilians can't go there anymore. But back then, the National Railway Kagoshima Main Line ran through a vast area of pine forests and fields of tall Japanese silver grass. If you're unfamiliar, picture wheat fields. It was a place where my friends and I played a lot. The grass grew taller than most of us kids, making this hidden area perfect for games of hide and seek, tag, and all sorts. Part of the reason the railway line in my area closed down was due to a number of deaths that happened on the platforms. Self-inflicted, sadly. One day right after the New Year's, I went out to play with my granddad and my little sister. We'd been visiting a neighbor, and on our way back, we decided to cut across the fields near the railroad tracks. It was a shortcut we often took, and I loved the way the tall grass would sway in the wind, almost like it was alive. As we pushed our way through the tall grass, we stumbled upon a clearing in the middle. In this open space, lying flat on his back, was a man in a work uniform. He was a big guy, and his mouth was slightly open, like he was snoring or something, and it looked like he had passed out from drinking too much. Unfortunately, it wasn't uncommon to see drunk people every now and then in that secluded area. Sometimes when we went out to play down there, we saw older people getting drunk, and we just had to turn around and leave. I turned to my grandpa and said, "It's already 500. Shouldn't we wake him up?" He'll catch a cold if he stays out here. I was only 8, but I knew enough to worry about him. He'll be fine. He's not a kid. After all, my sister chimed in. So we left him there and continued home. About 10 minutes later, we arrived just in time for dinner. That night, they had grilled mackerel, and I remember the smell of the fish filling the house, mingling with the cold air that came in whenever someone opened the door. I didn't think much about the man we saw, assuming he'd wake up and go home once he sobered up. The next day, there was a small article in the newspaper. It reported that a body had been found near the railroad tracks. The article said that the man had likely suffered a fatal heart attack. The location mentioned was exactly where we had found the man, and the time of discovery was noted at around 4 p.m. A little after we saw him, the time of death was estimated to have been the night before. Since no one usually walks through those tall grasses near the tracks, it's no wonder it took so long for someone to find him. Hey, if we walked a bit earlier, we would have found him, and maybe we could have helped him, I said to my sister, my childlike curiosity taking over. But as soon as I said that, I felt a strange feeling of discomfort settle into my chest. I couldn't explain it at the time, but there was this unshakable sense that I should just forget about the whole thing. It was like my mind was trying to block out what we had seen, and I couldn't understand why the memory made my mouth feel sour and my stomach twist in knots. Later, as the memory started to come back in sharper detail, I began to understand what had bothered me so much. Why hadn't we tried harder to wake the man up? Why had we just left him there, assuming he'd be fine? But the most unsettling question of all, the one that still gives me the chills, was this: when we left, I remember seeing that man move, like he was turning over in his sleep. But if he had really been dead since the night before, who or what did we actually see lying there that day? To this day, I can't explain what we saw. Maybe it was my imagination trying to make sense of something too strange for an 8-year-old to process. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something more to that clearing in the tracks, something that still lingers there, hidden among the tall grass. Maybe we saw the spirit of the recently departed. Whatever the case, it's a memory that has stayed with me, a reminder that not everything we see can be easily explained. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from my friend Yoichi. It was so out of character for him that I almost thought he pocket-dialed me. Yoichi isn't the kind of guy to reach out, he's more of the quiet type, someone who prefers to keep himself to himself. We had been friends for a while, but even though we got along quite well, he rarely reached out. It wasn't that he didn't care, he just didn't like bothering people, and I guess deep down, he didn't like being bothered either. When I answered the phone, I was surprised to hear how tired he sounded. Yoichi, what's up? You sound exhausted. There was a brief pause before he chuckled, but this wasn't his usual laugh. It was thin, almost forced. Yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time lately. I'm so tired. Maybe I'm getting old. You know, I couldn't help but laugh at that. What are you talking about? We're both still in our 20s. We're far from old. I mean, he was in the opposite end of his 20s for me, but I couldn't believe that he was making out like he was an old man. Yoichi and I worked at the same convenience store. He worked the night shift. It wasn't the most exciting job, but the pay was decent, especially since he worked the graveyard shift. Over time, he fully adapted to the lifestyle that the night shift demanded. It suited him in a way, given how he preferred to be left alone. The quiet hour of the night meant fewer customers and more time alone with his thoughts. But something about the way he sounded on the phone made me think that this time, the isolation was getting to him. Did something happen at work? I asked, my tone a little bit more serious now. There was a pause, longer this time. Yeah, kind of. Can we meet up? The hesitation in his voice made me worry. Yoichi wasn't one to ask for help lightly, so whatever was bothering him had to be serious. We agreed on a day to meet up, and after he hung up, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in my chest. I was thinking, did he get into substances or something? Those night shifts can be tiring. Maybe he needed something to stay awake. Then I wondered if he had gotten into debt, and there were debt collectors at our store pressuring him for money. Whatever it was, it didn't seem like it was going to be good news. Little did I know, when I met up with him, I would hear a story that would chill me to my core. On the day that we were supposed to meet, I made my way over to YOI's apartment. I'd been there a few times before, and it always struck me how neat and organized everything was. His place was spotless, almost too neat for a guy living on his own. He was meticulous, almost to the point of being obsessive about cleanliness. It didn't seem to match his personality, at least the side of him that I experienced at work. When I walked in, I immediately felt a strange tension in the air. It was subtle, like a faint buzz that you couldn't quite place. "Hey, I'm sensing something a little off around you," I said, half joking but with an edge of seriousness. He looked at me, the whites of his eyes hovering over dark circles below. "Yeah, you're probably right." He let out a deep sigh. As I looked at him more closely, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was a dark, almost sticky energy clinging to him like a cloud of black smoke that seemed as if only I could see it. It wasn't something I had ever encountered before, but I knew it wasn't good. Now I know that some people will scoff at this, but I've always felt as if I had the ability to sense the presence of the paranormal. I don't know if it's something I inherited. You know, I was in at first, like hereditary, but I just somehow see things that others might not. "I bet that's why you're feeling so tired," I said as I instinctively moved closer to him. I reached out and, without thinking, started to move my hands over him in an attempt to clear away that bad, weird energy from around him. It felt like trying to wipe away something that didn't want to budge, but after a few moments, the air around him seemed to lighten. Yoichi stretched his shoulders and neck. "Thanks, I feel a bit better now," he said, and then he smiled, though the weariness in his eyes hadn't gone away. We sat down in his living room, and after a few quiet moments, Yoichi started to tell me about what had been going on. A little background before we push on with his story: our store was located on a road that led to a cemetery, one that was famous for its view of the ocean during open. The place gets packed with people, but for the rest of the year, it's pretty quiet. You could sort of recognize the regulars, as they would mostly be locals who stopped by to grab something on their way home. Yoichi had gotten to know most of them by sight, if not by name. His shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and during those late hours, customers were rare. He usually spent the night monitoring the security cameras from the small room behind the register. It wasn't exactly thrilling work, but it was fine. He said that he was used to it. He liked the quiet nights. But then one night, something strange happened. It was around 2 a.m. On a particularly quiet night when Yoichi noticed a man standing in front of the sandwiches and ready meals, trying to figure out what to buy. There was something off about the guy, though Yoichi couldn't quite put his finger on it. "When did he come in?" Yoichi muttered to himself, frowning. He hadn't heard the chime that usually rang when someone entered the store. Everyone knows when you enter a convenience store, they have those chimes to alert the staff, but Yoichi swore that he hadn't heard a thing. He figured he must have missed it because he was tired. It was late, and after hours of staring at security monitors, it was easy to let your mind drift. He checked the register and noticed that they were running low on change, so he decided to head to the back office to get more. The man was still browsing when he left the counter. He quickly exchanged the bills for coins, keeping an eye on the monitor the whole time, and then he made his way back to the register. "Wait, where'd he go?" Yoichi stopped in his tracks, staring at the empty space where the man had been standing just moments before. The man had vanished. For a moment, Yoichi thought he might have been a shoplifter, but the store's alarms would have gone off if he had tried to leave with something expensive without paying. There were no signs of any disturbance. No out-of-place items or dropped merchandise. It was as if the man had simply disappeared into thin air. Maybe the guy just decided not to buy anything and left quietly, Yoichi thought, trying to remain calm. He was alone in the store after all. At 6 a.m. The morning shift worker arrived, and Yoichi handed over his duties, changed out of his uniform, and headed home. The strange encounter lingered in his mind, but by the time he was heading home, he said he was too tired to give it too much thought. As soon as he got home, he crashed on his bed and fell asleep almost instantly. That's when this tiredness issue began for him. He was woken up a few hours later by a call from his manager, still groggy. "Yoichi, did we have a power outage last night?" the manager asked. His voice had a note of irritation to it. Yoichi was confused and felt shattered. No way." The manager explained that some customers had called in that morning, complaining about the sandwiches and the ready-made meals that they had bought the night before. They claimed that the food tasted off, some even saying that it was spoiled. This was unusual. One of his nightly duties was to stock the sandwiches and ready meals, and they seemed fresh when he received them that night. No, there wasn't any power outage, you assured him, thinking back to the night before. Everything had been normal, or at least as normal as it could be. "Well, all right then," the manager said, sounding a bit uncertain before hanging up. "The guy you saw was a ghost," I blurted out, not really thinking about how it would sound. Yoichi's eyes widened in shock. Even after death, spirits still eat. "But not like we do," I continued, trying to explain. "They feed on the essence or scent of food. I have heard that when a spirit, especially one that starved to death, feeds on something, it can affect the taste or quality of the food." Yoichi stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and fear. "Considering where our store is, it wouldn't be that surprising if spirits wander in from time to time," I added, trying to sound calm despite the unsettling nature of what I was saying. "It's rare for me, someone who's never been in touch with the supernatural, to have an experience like this," he said quietly. "You probably just ended up on the same wavelength as that spirit. Think about it like tuning a radio and finding a station in a sea of static," I offered, trying to reassure him. "Even people who normally don't see ghosts can have a brush with them if the circumstances are just right." He sighed again, deeper this time. Apparently, similar things happened for a few more nights before I finally decided to quit. The experiences were too frightening for him, and the sense of being watched by something unseen was too much to bear. I couldn't blame him. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. If I were in his shoes, I would have done the same. I wonder if the ghostly customer he saw in our store still comes in at around him. I'm not looking to find out. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I don't want to work the night shift. This happened about 3 years ago, and it was just after I had gotten into university. I was really proud of myself, and I had managed to pass a really difficult entrance exam. I was looking forward to trying life in the city alone for the first time. I knew it was going to be a big step, but I was ready for it. I come from the countryside, so it was going to be all new for me, and tough to leave the little support network and friends that I made there. My first year at university was a mix of excitement and adjustment. I made friends with some other students, and my mom would often come to visit, using my place as a kind of hotel. I didn't mind it. It was nice to hear how my family was doing. I guess it was her way of making sure that I was okay, and I guess that she missed me too. When I started my second year of university in April, my mom came to visit again. Apparently, One of her favorite artists had a concert nearby, so she decided to use my place as her hotel as per usual. I thought, oh great, here we go again. But since she sends me money every month, I couldn't really complain. I didn't want to risk having my allowance reduced, and those were the days. Now that morning, she said, I'm going to the concert today, so I'll be back pretty late. I nodded while eating the miso soup that she had made, and out of nowhere, she said, so how do you feel about this apartment? What do you mean? I asked, a little taken aback by the sudden question. Any weird neighbors or noisy people or anything? I don't know, I replied between my part-time job, classes, and parties. I hardly knew who lived in my building. But I did remember that there was a girl from the same university on my floor. She seemed pretty outgoing, always having friends over for drinks, and I envied her a bit for that. Well, whether you got work today, right? My mom asked. Yeah, I nodded. Try not to stay out too late, okay? I wanted to tell her to come home early too, but I just kept that thought to myself. When I got back that night and said, I'm back, the apartment was pitch black. It was 8:30 p.m. and my mom wasn't back yet. I was hungry, but since it was a bit warm and sweaty that day, I decided to just take a shower first. While I was in the shower, I heard some rattling sounds, and I figured my mom had come back. I saw a dark figure moving through the frosted glass door as she entered the bathroom. Well, you're back early, Mom, I called out, but there was no response. Hey, do you want to go get some ramen? I asked, and I heard a sound like someone clicking their tongue. And with that, the dark figure disappeared. What's up with that? I thought, stepping out of the bathroom. She usually loved ramen. As soon as I got out of the bathroom, the smell hit me immediately. EW, that stinks. I blurted out. It smelled like kerosene, which was weird because I didn't use a kerosene heater. As I was wondering why, I heard the front door unlocking, and my mom walked in. You came in just to go back outside again? I asked, confused, and she looked at me kind of puzzled. What do you mean? I just got here, she said, holding bags filled with concert merchandise. So who was that in the bathroom? My mind raced as I told my mom what happened. Panicked, she called the police, and they came right away. We quickly discovered that nothing was stolen, and that there were no signs of forced entry. I guess I didn't fully close the door when I walked in, or something, and the police suggested maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe a neighbor had one too many drinks and walked in what they thought was their apartment but got it wrong, realized their error, and left. And my mom was furious, but it made me wonder if I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just tired. I wasn't able to fully convince myself of that because of that strange smell of kerosene. The week after that strange incident was one of the longest and most nerve-wracking of my life. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, and I found myself jumping at every little noise and double-checking the locks at my door multiple times a day. I even contemplated moving to a different place, but my lease wasn't up, and finding a new apartment in the city wasn't easier or cheap. A week after that strange incident, something terrible happened. The girl who lived on my floor was murdered by the middle-aged man who lived below us. After he went through that terrible act, he set his apartment on fire and went with it. The news and internet said the girl had riled up other neighbors by having parties often and making lots of noise, and that's why she was targeted. But that wasn't really true. Even when she had friends over, you could barely hear them. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't help but wonder if the dark figure I saw that day was actually him. Maybe I was his initial target, but he backed off because my mom was there and would come back soon. The idea that I could have been in that poor girl's shoes kept me awake at night, and for days, I replayed the incidents in my head, trying to find some clarity, some sign they could tell me what really happened. I remembered every detail, the sound of the door, the figure behind the frosted glass, and the smell of kerosene. It was all too real to have been a figment of my imagination. I'll never know for sure what happened that night, and that is certainly something that I've had to live with. The police closed the case quickly after the man died, labeling him as a deranged individual with a grudge against the noisy neighbors. They didn't dig any deeper, and there were no leads, no witnesses besides me, and I wasn't even sure of what I saw. All I can do is pray for the girl who lost her life. May she rest in peace. Even now, years later, I occasionally think back to that night. This happened when I was back in middle school. My family used to live in an old, huge house in KYL. It was a pretty imposing place that had a sense of history in every floorboard. Apparently, the house had been in my family for generations, and we were considered pretty important back in the day. My great-grandfather had the house rebuilt during the Meiji era, turning it into a two-story Western-style home, which was quite rare in Japan at the time. It was the kind of place that you could almost feel the past lingering. Everyone in my family had bedrooms on the second floor, so at night, the whole family would be sleeping upstairs, leaving the first floor quiet and empty. We were all early to bed, early to rise kind of people, and the house had a rhythm that we rarely broke. But one night, I don't know why, but I just couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with random thoughts. The old house was always so quiet at night, but for some reason, I was restless. I remember glancing at my clock 3 a.m. I hate that time of night because you just know everyone around is asleep. It's heavy with silence. And at the age I was, even the slightest sound could make your heart race. And then I heard footsteps in the hallway outside of my room. The sound was soft at first, like someone trying not to wake anyone, but it grew louder as it got closer. The footsteps stopped right in front of my door. I froze, waiting for a knock or for the door to creak open, but nothing happened. The house was silent again. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just one of my family members getting up in the middle of the night. But then something weird hit me. I didn't recognize those footsteps. You know how you can usually tell who's walking around just by the sound of their steps? My dad's steps were heavy and deliberate, Mom's lighter, almost hurried, and my brother's was somewhere in between. And my sisters were very light, but these footsteps didn't sound like anyone I knew. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt, and the longer I lay there, the more freaked out I got. Eventually, I did what any scared kid would do. I pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, hoping to block out the fear until I finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I told my older brother, who often stayed up late, about what happened. He gave me a relieved look and said, "You heard them too. But listen, whatever you do, never open the door." His reaction threw me off. My brother was the kind of guy who didn't get easily rattled, so seeing him like that made me feel even more anxious. I pressed in for more details, but he just shook his head and said, "Don't tell anyone about this, okay? And don't ever open that door, no matter what." I tried to get him to explain more, but he wouldn't say anything else. It was like he had decided that was all I needed to know, and that was the end of the conversation. I didn't push it, but his words stuck with me from then on. I was on edge, especially at night, but strangely enough, I never heard those footsteps again. That's when things took a turn for the worse. The very next day, my brother was in a car accident. It was sudden, tragic, and he didn't survive. My family was devastated. I was in shock, barely able to process what had happened. After my brother's death, I didn't mention the footsteps to anyone. My dad especially had always hated anything to do with the supernatural. He was a very practical man, and talking about ghosts or spirits would have just upset him. So I kept it to myself. But last year, my dad passed away too. The story came up again in the most unexpected way during the wake. My younger sister suddenly brought it up. We were sitting together quietly, sharing memories, when she leaned in and asked if I remembered hearing footsteps outside my door. I hadn't noticed at the time, but apparently, she had been hearing the footsteps for a while, way before I did. She confessed that on the same night I heard them, she also heard what sounded like my brother opening his door. The thought sent a chill down my spine. My sister admitted that she had been terrified and never spoke to him about it. She would hide under the covers when she heard the footsteps, waiting for them to pass. But that night, she was certain that our brother opened his door when the footsteps stopped outside my room. What happened after that? We'll never know. My sister never talked about it again, and the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. What had my brother seen that night? Was he told something by my dad about the footsteps? Maybe it's something that gets passed down through generations. Why was he so insistent that I never opened the door? And who what was walking in our hallway at 3? After my sister told me what she told me, I found myself wondering about my grandparents. They had both passed away long before I was born, but I heard stories about how they never left their rooms after midnight. My mom told me once that when she first married into the family, she found it odd. When she asked my dad about it, he just shrugged it off and said, "We were early sleepers." It seemed strange to me that my family's wealth and this weird late-night visitor thing could be linked, but now I wonder if there was anything more than that. What was it about the dead of night in that house that kept my grandparents in their rooms? And why did my brother have to remind me not to open the door? I honestly feel like I'm missing part of the secret, a family secret. These are questions that I'll probably never get answers to, and the memories are just that, memories. But every now and then, I find myself thinking back to that night. I still don't know what to make of it, and maybe I never will. All I know is that sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, I still think about the footsteps, wondering who or what they belong to. End of story.